On behalf of the School of Art and Design, I would like to welcome you to ARTSpeak, program sponsored by the Fine Arts Department and the President's Diversity Council, in which artists discuss diversity in artistic practice. My name is Erica Massacoy, and I'm the Assistant Dean for the School of Art and Design. Today's guest speaker, Wangechi Mutu, was born in Nairobi, Kenya, received her BFA from Cooper Union for the advancement of the arts and science, and earned her MFA from Yale University's School of Art. Her most recognizable work explores society's stereotypes of female beauty and exoticism and features painted and collage figures collected from fashion magazines. Her most confrontational work is rooted within the context of war, forced displacement, and alienation. Additionally, she also creates video, sculpture, and site-specific installations. Wangechi and I met nearly a decade ago when she was an artist in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem. At the time, my research as a media scholar and curator focused on convergence, race, and representation, and the Studio Museum teamed us up to work together. We connected over shared interests in fashion and art, and I knew immediately that she would grow to become one of the most highly regarded contemporary artists of our time. I'll tell you why. Already she created a distinctive methodology, and the look of her work was singular. I was impressed with the manner in which she linked beauty and terror, poetry, and social criticism. What's more, her technique was fully realized and rendered so elegantly. At the time, I was obsessed with cut and mix practices in the image of the cyborg in Black art. In particular, I was comparing the cyborg's ability to make sense of its cut-up mechanical existence to contextualize the patchwork existence of post-colonized people. And to my great satisfaction, Wangechi was capturing this process in her work to a most commanding effect, outfitting ethereal figures and synthetic limbs. It was really beautiful. I felt then, as I do now, that collage is the most relevant aesthetic of our time, regardless of the medium in which it is practiced. The format allows for multiple narrative interpretations in depth, and as a result, Wangechi's work can traverse the narratives of high fashion, global identity, amputation, histories of colonialism, hierarchy, power, female exploitation, and social corruption. So it's no surprise to me that, to date, her work is included in the permanent collections of leading contemporary art museums, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, or that last year she was honored by Deutsche Bank as their first Artist of the Year, or that, on more than one occasion, I have been giddy with pleasure when I see her posing fabulously in the pages of Vogue magazine.
there's something really powerful about this moment in all our lives. And I remember being a student both in Parsons and Cooper Union, and not really knowing where exactly this thing that I was doing, where it was going to take me. But I came from quite far away, so for me it was sort of, you know, you kind of had to do or die, just get on with it and become the thing that you're here for. And I think art is powerful, and I think art has kept me sane, kept me alive, and art saves lives. Art is important, and I'm gonna go through the sort of the span of what I've done so far, which is not massive, but it is important to me, and in it I will embed the story of my life, where I come from, which is of utmost relevance to why I do what I do. And
planet Earth can't even be sufficient without the rain. It doesn't produce rain, you know. Sunshine, it doesn't produce the sun. The wind, it doesn't produce the wind. All planet Earth produces is the dead bodies of humanity. That's its only creation. Everything else comes from outer space, from unknown regions. Humanity's life depends upon the unknown. Knowledge is laughable when attributed to a human being.
Mythology, astro timeless immortality, astro thought in mystic sound, astro black of outer space, astro natural, darkness dark, astro reach beyond the stars, out to endlessness, astro black, cosmo earth. The universe is in my voice. The universe speaks through this song to those of earth and of the world. Listen while you have the chance. Find your place among the stars. Get in tune with outer worlds. Breathe out multiplicity, harmony, equational melody, horizon speed, astro black and cosmo dark, astro black and cosmo dark, astro black and cosmo dark.
I use it when I try to kind of think about, encapsulate my thoughts about what it is I want to say in these sort of forums. But I also like certain things, certain quotes that he's made because they're succinct. And it's difficult to understand how Africa has gotten to the point it has because there's so many specific stories. But in this particular one, I come from the highlands in Kenya. a very fertile area in the central part of the country where the British settled. And the thing that's beautiful about that area and desirable is that the weather is never hot. It's actually this warm, temperate weather throughout the year, and it was perfect for British settlers. So they came there and settled and stole the land and stuck around too long. And in the process of this pretty soft entrance initially, because it was through missionaries and clinics, people were removed, and my family was removed from their homes. And this is way before I was born, of course, and placed in these kind of camps. Move over to the Congo, a very different kind of colonial occupation that I learned about as a student, and it's incredibly graphic in this image, but in actual fact was not unusual at all, because the Congo, which is actually seen as and known to be one of the richest countries in the world. In fact, I think their entire what they produce in terms of raw materials is actually a combination of gross product of the US and of Europe together, because they have such a wealthy nation full of a kind of minerals that are not found in Kenya, which is part of the reason why Kenya does not have the issues that the Congo has. There is an investment in mining those issues in Congo, and at incredible cost to the people who live there. King Leopold ruled the Congo. It was a very different manner of ruling, because he owned the Congo on his own, and he started off extracting ivory mainly, and soon realized rubber, which was being used for tire making and so forth, was an incredibly precious product. Rubber is a very hard material to grow, and basically it cuts your body up, and you have to go up trees and take bark off of it and everything. And so in order to sort of coerce people who are not interested in farming for the colonialists to work for them, they would do this sort of thing. And I remember seeing images like this, and they're sort of embedded somewhere in my subconscious. Of course, now as a mother, it resonates even more. And I realized when I started some of the work that I did around the time of the pinup series, I wasn't even identifying exactly these images. And when I started to research what it is that that happened and how and where these pictures came out of specifically, because there are other parts of Africa where this sort of thing happened, but in Congo it was so vicious, I realized that it was very much part of this ongoing dialogue in my mind that has been a way of trying to understand our sort of development as African nations, as cultures that were colonized. So this is a pinup series. These are small works about between 8 by 10 and 11 by 17. There are these watercolors, a very odd moment for me, because I was making works almost as in a therapeutic manner, in a response to another movement I had made, this time from graduate school back to New York, and I was having a very hard time figuring out my place and space in this sort of in this city that doesn't hold your territory for you. You sort of leave it and you come back and you realize everything has been redistributed. And so I was, these are very practical issues, but I was looking for studios, and I was looking for where to live, and I was trying to figure out issues that have to do with, career and relationships and friendships and so forth. And I remember collecting ferociously these magazines at that time off the streets, and I was, drawing out of them these figures, and eventually these figures got contorted and softened and normalized, and they went from being these incredible androgynous sort of model-like figures to being these females, and then I started to mutilate them, and give them parts that I felt described a little bit better what I felt they were. It's included sort of these wigs and these facial features, and In some instances, I made a real effort to kind of bruise the mutilated limbs to kind of emphasize the fact that they were missing. But there's always this pose, there's always this kind of the language of sort of fashion photography, which I feel comes out of ethnographic photography, which is sort of wraps back into it again and again, and they sort of have this vicious romance, the two things. The photography of the exotic is very much the photography of the erotic, and I've always loved and despise that relationship, but I use it, you know, ferociously in my work. I started to think about Josephine Baker more seriously, and a lot more recently, actually. I kind of ran away from what Josephine Baker meant, because I also, because I understood that in many ways Josephine Baker hadn't been able to fight all the battles that that she was sort of embedded in. But at the same time, I think there's something even more interesting than perhaps perceiving her as a radical or an activist performer, which is that there's this sort of fiction of who she is. There's this an absolute fakeness and creation of the self that I think is interesting. So Josephine Baker, and if you look it up at this point, is described as a French dancer of American origin. She became a French citizen eventually. And I have this very dear fascination for a lot of these women artists who've sort of had to move and reconscribe who they are. In fact, explain who they are somehow through this, the lens of the new place that they're in. And I think that's what Josephine Baker's ultimate genius and curse was, because here was a woman who, because of the kind of prejudicial circumstances in America, was so looked down upon and sort of had such a hard time negotiating where to perform, which audience was allowed to see her. You know, ultimately, at that point, audiences were segregated. And so she ends up in France, where there seems to be more of an openness about her image and about who she is. But unfortunately, there's only there's a prescribed amount of things that she can do. So she plays the African, you know, the noble savage. And in these images, you see these films, and she's a complete, utter, gorgeous buffoon. Like, she plays these unbelievably seductive, degrading, sort of, you know, all this combination of things. But ultimately, she also plays something that doesn't exist, this banana skirt, this dance that she came up with, these things that you find nowhere in the continent of Africa or anywhere else, that I find so fascinating, because they are a combination of all of those strange, indigestible things that we despise or dream about, a thing that we don't know. And in this case, it was the African, the female African. So the banana skirt to me is one of the most incredible things. I have never seen a banana skirt in any ethnicity, tribe, people, anywhere. And I think for some reason it became believable, because Josephine Baker wrapped it into her performance so well. But this is an image that I place in this talk, because it really has resonance in my psyche as well. A moment when women, my mother's age, my grandmother's age, got up to protest a very difficult time in Kenya. The dictatorship of Moi was so deeply embedded in our society. People were being arrested without trial, were being tortured. In fact, it was almost common it was so well known that there was this torture building in the middle of the city, and these women actually went out to protest in front of this building and to do sit-ins and whatever it took to take up space and make noise. And eventually, the president ordered for them to be removed, and the riot police came, and these women persisted, and the riot police got more vicious, and these women, in this amazing moment of possession and utter fury, took their clothes off. Kenya is a very conservative culture as far as imagery on TV. Pornography is illegal, both in media and magazines and so forth. And certainly images of nudity and intimacy, kissing, and all these things are very limited on TV. And so this image, which was shown on TV and then photographed by journalists, was incredibly powerful. It was the most obscene and powerful thing I'd ever seen, which is my mother's body type on television, naked. And basically they're telling these guys, you know, I am your mother and you dare to do this. And this curse actually worked. And in fact, it has been used by many different women, including women like Fela's mother protested in the colonial period of Nigeria by also taking her clothes off. And it's been used by women all over the world in very unique and specific places. So this image stuck with me. And I remember when I made these fat legs, like I tend to do afterwards, I thought about what it is about these legs, their comfortingness, their worldliness, and the fact that they're sort of despised in sort of the ideals of what beauty is considered to be from a European perspective. This is not. This voluptuousness is actually not the apex of beauty. So I made these fat legs, and I made them as sort of instruments of comfort. Again, sort of thinking of, in some ways, to recreate something that is nostalgic, that is my mother, that is my home, that is that I could sit on and use. And I also extended it the idea by sort of shading the edge, the ends of the legs, as you can see, look as if there has been a mutilation, and so does the stitching in the fabric. It looks quite like skin. This is the kind of watercolors I was doing when I was making these kind of objects of comfort and memory. This series is called the Immigrant Nightmare series. There's about 6 images in this piece, and it's really just these sort of horrific images that that would flash in my mind. When I look at certain things in history, I like to sort of parallel them or look across and see what was happening simultaneous to that in another region or close to that time, just to kind of explain the framework of how is this possible and why did this happen. So this is the horror of the Holocaust has this incredible underbelly of sort of progress and scientific research and all these other things that the Nazi movement preferred to talk about at the time. And so these images are actually from medical research, humans being used to progress the idea, the notion of what science is. Germany had been given Namibia as a colony, and in fact, so about 20, 30 years before the Second World War, as you see, 1904, the Herero were being massacred, and so they were also being used as for scientific research. And so this image is not an image of just two heads. I mean, rather, it is an actual images of a head, a decapitated woman that was found and used in these sort of kind of horrific instances. It's described by certain academics as the sort of rehearsal for the Holocaust, this genocide that happened in Namibia, because they're not a massive population of people, but 80% of their people were killed off. I go to this because there's this sort of movement in my work towards using the face, the head, the portrait as a way of defining these atrocities, but also of defining who we are and why we are afraid and why we're attracted to certain things, how we recognize each other and what that means, how we know how to identify one another when we belong to one ethnicity, and then we look at other people and we think they all look alike, and what that comes out of and what that means. In actual fact, I think it really is a trait that is embedded in all humans, and it's a way of surviving, understanding and recognizing the nuances of your people, your tribe, your ethnicity, your family is an incredibly important thing. So this is ethnographic photography from an Italian man who was sort of comparing different tribes, but using this kind of matrix of Europe as the kind of the tip, the height of where beauty and kind of and the profile has been perfected in the Aryan face, and then everything sort of degrades as you go further south towards the equator and even further than that. These are sort of actual machines and mechanisms, little gadgets that were used to measure these features and eye color and so forth. Hannah Hawk comes into my sort of mind's eye, and again, it was sort of this thing where I sort of met her work and appreciated it, but didn't want to really go too far into it. And this is probably because I was still in school and trying to kind of run away from these works that had binaries, obvious binaries in my eyes. You know, the sort of the European and the African. I sort of thought that is too simplistic. I don't want to think in that way. So I left it, and then after many years of sort of, you know, shelving her, I brought her back into the fold of what I think of and how I think. And I find her very interesting because she's working during the Nazi movement. She's working in Germany. She's sort of dealing with a lot of the issues that I find to be incredibly potent and poisonous, and in her own way trying to understand how does this fit together? Is there any fit at all? And I think these collages that come out of this time are so powerful because there's a kind of a battle and a melding at the same time between things that she sees as related and perhaps confrontational to one another. Trinity Min is phenomenal in the way she uses theory and poetry, film, you know, the subconscious mind and research and all manner of things to create this sort of incredible whole of a thinker. But I find her to be, in my mind, an anthropologist. I find her to be the most sort of honest anthropologist because she's always sort of inside of her work, and embedded in the work of an anthropologist is the transformation of a person, is the conversion of a person. As you study people, you become like them, and you start to believe the things that they are about. And in actual fact, you never look at them from this perspective of a sort of an all-knowing God. You start to become a little bit like them, and I love that about her. And we didn't have too many stations growing up in Kenya, so you had either this or that to watch, and often you just watch whatever crap was on TV. And Pop in Germany was one of those shows that was about 80% things I don't even want to admit that I was watching, and then about 20% would show up, and it would be this incredible instance. And so at one point, Grace Jones shows up on the screen, and she's in this cage wearing a leopard skin cat suit thing with a tail and writhing around. I mean, looking more beast and base than you could imagine, but just fierce as fierce. And I remember thinking, oh my God, what is this thing? And this thing was Grace. And so this is her in sort of a creation of Jean-Paul Goude, who was her partner, but also helped engineer these sort of characters that she was. But Grace is always sort of on top of whatever it is that she's made up into. So even in Keith Haring's work or in any designer's pieces, you know, there is this outer casing of whatever it is that they've had her put on, but inside of it is this power, ferociousness of Grace. And I started to think about these facial features in terms of aliens, and how aliens always look like humans, and they're always often described first from a facial perspective. I mean, I always think if we ever encountered aliens, they're probably going to be energy forms, or they're going to look like crystals. They're not going to look like us. But we always describe aliens as looking like us, and the only thing we do is we distort the face somehow. And it, I think, is obviously because it goes back to that thing that an alien is actually a thing that we don't know that is actually us. So all of these portraits, in fact, have a little bit of that idea, but also a deck of many other things that I like to play around with. So there's wordplay, like, you know, shiny black skin, or you know, white teeth, or and then the snake turned out to be this perfect mouth. And in these, you know, in my mad way of kind of arranging and probably not even arranging, like the disturbing the kind of the order of imagery in my studio, I always sort of make these relationships quite intuitively and come up with these faces and these characters in ways that I often don't premeditate. Here's another sort of ethnographic, sort of forensic kind of image. It's very much related to sort of police imagery and forensics in terms of medicine and research and so forth. But there's this very kind of distinct belief that if you look at a face, if you look at the way the head is shaped and how the structure of their cranium, that somehow you'll understand who they are morally, ethnically, intellectually, and it's absolute nonsense, obviously, but it's still somehow in the fabric of the way we see things and we look at people. There is still a big place and a big unfortunate reality in terms of what profiling is about. So I keep these sort of methods in my work, but I try to mess around with them and give them that lack of logic that I believe they're actually embedded in. So these mugshots come out of this series of photographs, and they're all actual people, but I've used all manner of things to create what is the semblance of a face, which is two eyes and a nose and a mouth. I also like this notion that there is something about seeing that is very much like entering a room, a dark room, and that you think you know where you are, or maybe you hope you know where you are, and it takes a while to actually focus and notice the details. And that there is something frightening about that time frame between that moment when you can't see up until when things become apparent, because sometimes things are really close to you and you didn't see them when you first walked in. And this is another piece on the left from my forensic series, and that's a series of 8 works, and they include the first one with the pink hat and the snake mouth, and you know, Jay-Z said something interesting, so I thought I would put it in there. Masks are a big part of my. I love to look at masks. They're a big part of my work, and they're part of the way I understand myself and how people appear to me. So I've used masks a lot, literally and otherwise, in the work. This is a series of postcard works, postcard-size works out of a postcard series I sort of wanted to play with and dilute, disappear, integrate figure and face. So in all of these, I've tried to continue this sort of research of the face as a very fertile kind of place, a very charged response area to something very deep within us. There's also sort of an emphasis on female sexuality, female health in this particular series. It's a series that's actually female reproductive organ diseases and problems, and so there's all manner of things, all the way from you know, fibroids to uterine cancer and ectopic pregnancies, and let's jump all the way over to advertising, and how Africa appears, and how Kenya in particular is understood in the sort of the psyche of the European media, I'll say, because I won't speak for everyone. I'm sure there's many people who don't see Kenya and Africa this way. But there still is this amazing ability, very sort of easy way of placing these images of indigenous Kenyan people together with sort of fashion folk. You know, and here we see that kind of that battle between ethnography and glamour, and And not a single one of these men is smiling, and I'm not sure, I doubt it's because they were told to frown. I think it's because they're trying to figure out when the picture will be done. Bush love, I call it, but it is actually bush love. Bush love this way, but also bush love Hannah Hawke's piece right here. And I think this is why I love something about Hannah Hawke's trying to also configure her place and in the European eyes place in this whole colonial sort of language. Little lily in the background. Masks, but in particular masks that have these sort of double faces that have inspired me because there's a time when I felt there was these two voices in my mind, in my behavior, and how I walked around. And I remember thinking, you know, I feel like I'm from here, but I'm over there. I feel like I'm this, but I'm also, I have to be that. And there's a certain point, I think almost just before I went to grad school, when I started to think about it differently without even realizing. And I remember writing this little story at a point when this was happening, and this story was about these two conjoined individuals, and they were always battling, and this battle was about where to go, bend over, stand up, you know, move over here. I want to talk to, I want to stay here longer. And the story kind of unraveled in this very simple way. And at some point they sat down after frustrating amounts of inability to kind of agree on things. And in the silence of sitting down with each other, they heard another voice. And they both realized it wasn't each other, and this other voice was this third entity. And that's when I realized that the third entity was the creation of this new identity, this identity which is neither one nor the other. And so in this work, Me, Myself, and Shy, which is actually a very recently completed piece, it was started quite a while back, but I finally managed to finish it in this manner. It sort of comes out of this idea of these characters that are one separated by this other more dominant in the middle. Eartha Kitt is another one of these incredible fictions, another sort of diasporic girl, meaning she's moved from where she originally was from, for whatever reason, unable to fit in, unable to sort of find work and be appreciated. She ended up in Paris as well. But what I love about Eartha Kitt is she also invents something, some of which I love to make fun of, because it is sort of the ubiquitous flag of what anybody considers African. The leopard skin, for some reason, leopard skin, animal pelts. If you throw that into an image, it means Africa. But here's Eartha Kitt looking absolutely regal, and I love the fact that Eartha Kitt came up with this character. And I mean, if you really listen to her, it sounds like nothing and everything all at once. It's this sort of feline French, freakish dame. You know, she sounds like an absolute entity that could only be made by someone who is getting away from the thing that she was and trying to figure out something new. Praying mantra. I think in this piece, in a certain moment, I was sort of trying to think about the removal of this issue of skin as a way of describing ethnicity, because one of the most incredible things about being raised in Africa is that there's always a majority of your own kind around you. So you don't grow up thinking about race in the same way that Americans do. And so there's many a time I remember trying to kind of unravel the conundrum of race and how obvious it seemed that it was an absolute construction, but at the same time how impossible it is, because it is in place. No matter how fake it is or how you know how much of an illusion it is, it's absolutely in place, and everyone has agreed upon it. So I sort of tried to make this work that was about sort of removing skin and creating these characters that had no color, had no particular kind of skin. So praying mantra, the previous one, and this one is writing death in my sleep, were kind of this attempt to create the non-race race, whatever that is. There is no such thing because there isn't. I love this particular image. This is part of the series done by Jean-Paul Coul, because it sort of it plays with this idea of what and who the animal is. To me, it does, at least. I always think that the animals are the audience, and Grace is kind of in charge. But of course, there's this absolute abjectness and working of a stereotype in her pose and in her cagedness. The great Nina Simone is a very rare image of her in the nude, but I think it's very powerful and sort of a different, different strategy. I think Josephine Baker, Eartha Kitt, Nina Simone were all very, very powerful voices, and during the civil rights movement, they all had political stances, and it's also interesting to see how they dealt with their positions. All of them actually, all three of those ladies went to France. It's all too late now. So, but this kind of thing exists, which is really interesting and to look at this point, and in my eyes, I think. The squat. I love the squat. The squat means so much, and at the same time is used in so many different ways. So this is another image using the Maasai as backdrop. Truth be told, the Maasai are incredibly photogenic people, and they're also a peacock people, I call them, because the men are the beautiful ones. The men are the ones who prune themselves and take care of their hair and their body and their garb, and the women are kind of the drab ones who are on the side and off to out in the background. And this has always been the case. So even from early times when Europeans came to East Africa, the men were always looked upon as sort of very regal and handsome. But I think one of the things about the Maasai is that there's certain things about them that fall very perfectly into the sort of ideals of European beauty, which is this kind of lithe, slender, tall features. And so I played around with the squat, and this is actually quite an early piece. It's done around the same time as the fat legs, because I wanted to sort of enter that eye and recreate. I mean, I guess my strategy is always to mimic in order to learn, and through mimicry, I tweak this the reality of what is being played with, and in this case, it's sort of ethnographic photography is an actual science of determining who people are and why and where and all this kind of stuff they come from. So this is out of that series. And at some point, I sort of have worked with my kind of mixing of the beast and the female body to try and sort of play with that idea, the notion of what the exotic is. What is this thing that we think we know, and we think we call African. These are two hunting dogs, actually. They look a little like hyenas, but they're actually hunting dogs. And the piece is called Intertwined. It's also a smaller work. There's images like this too, coming out of looking at a lot of fashion and advertising. I also look at a lot of photojournalism, because I think there's so much power in some of these pictures, but there's a lot of damage that's done with these iconic photographs. So the narrative, that this picture has so many different stories. There's a story that was posited by Kevin Carter and his family, but there's also the story that's given by the photographer who was there at the same time, who was talking about the fact that this child actually did have a mother who was very close, or rather close by, but they were distributing food at the time. Either way, this photograph is what's often used to describe Africa, this kind of continual cycle of desperation and horror, which does exist. but it's painted in such a way that there is absolutely no contextualization and no coming out of it. There is there's no hope in these images. Nobody Loves Me, I know. This is the piece I made and completed very recently. Bit of an exodus there. It's all right though. And this is my belief, and in the end is that the reason that I work the way I work is I actually do believe that everything sort of fits in together, and the leaking of categories is only sort of a telling of the fact that they actually belong together. This particular series was done with these postcard size works were done with a series called Women of the African Ark, and they're actually all women of a particular region which I come from, which is East Africa. The Ark of the Covenant is this actual thing, this box, this incredibly old and coveted, revered container that supposedly contains the tablets with commandments, and it's hidden somewhere in Eritrea, in these churches. And why all of these women fall under the Ark, I don't know, but I love the fact that you can play, and I can play, and you can think of Noah's Ark and the animals going into the Ark, and 2 by 2, and this Noah is able to save them as a result. So I was sort of playing with pairs and preciousness and archival artifacts and things that are considered to be objects, and this sort of objectification of these women and these images, and the re-objectification of them by making them, and hopefully their emancipation by the fact that somehow they become something new in the fiction that I've created out of them. So what you see here is the postcard in the background, and in the foreground is these sort of pornographic images of women from pornography that specifically is black, brown-skinned women. I remove whatever I find to be the most titillating and kind of in a way the most redundant parts of them, and instead I try to kind of create a relationship between that formally and this other image that is sort of the image of the indigenous, traditional, tribal African woman, which is an incredibly potent and beautiful image, but it's certainly not a description of this massive continent with people who are both urban, who are westernized, who are Asian, who are all different types. I mean, Africa's massiveness is probably one of the most overwhelmingly beautiful and tragic things about it, is there's so many people, and this is all that is used to describe us. So that was the series, and they were all contained in these vitrines. So I sort of tried to create that the Ark yet again, the Covenant of the Ark. At some point, I started to ponder on war, and I think it was because there was this incredible desire for this country was going into war, and I think most of us would agree it was a kind of war that didn't seem to have an end, didn't seem to have a true. Nothing was understood as to why it was happening, and so a lot of my work kind of came out of looking for images of war, and I know it's somewhat morbid, but I find that in essence. These things are hidden from us to try sort of control and obviously craft a different type of story from that is really going on. So I was looking at a lot of images of architecture and buildings and homes that had been victims of this kind of activity of war, this language of war. And Arachnid Curse and a lot of works came out of this sort of moment and this crisis that I was having, which is sort of living in a country that was actively attacking and occupying. Anyway, in it I try to create a being that was trapped and at the same time sort of powerful, because she is the creator of this web. And I created this other extension in a lot of these collages that moved away from the two-dimensional piece into the wall. And I started at this point. This is when I actually started to carve into walls and create these holes that were reminiscent of bullet holes. I actually took images of bullet-ridden houses and used them to create these constellations. And some of them actually look quite floral and sort of almost, the patterns looked a little bit like they were blossoming, but in others it was quite obvious that they were lacerations. They were carved in. There was sort of a violence that went into it. And at this particular time, I think I was also very aware that destroying the wall of a gallery is so much easier than actually than coming back and reconfiguring it and healing it again. In fact, it was a much grander process for the people in these spaces to bring back that wall to what it used to be, which is ultimately I think, and for me at least personally, the lesson of war is that it's really easy to start it up and invade, but much, much harder to bring it back. Another one of these horrific images of a sort of and you hear it in Sun Ra's words, that one of the things that humanity has been able to create better than anything else is human waste. It's like is wasting the bodies of humans. And so here's a graphic example of it, and yet and we think we would learn from that lesson, and then I do this where I look at something and I obsess on it because it pulls my heart, but then I also realize that, you know what, let me look at it from a perspective of someone who's, let me look at it from a more personal perspective. Let me bring it a little closer to home instead of sort of pointing a finger. And I went back to looking at the genocide in Rwanda, because it did affect a lot of the East African countries. Were very much affected by the populations who had to move, by the fact that all of our rivers were filled with bodies for months, actually. And in fact, the fish production went up tremendously because there was so much food for fish to eat. So in actual fact, the bodies of people killed in Rwanda continued to sustain us for months and months after the death of these people, the brutal death of these people, which in actual fact was a very intimate war, a very intimate genocide, an intimate massacre. And I say that because people were killing one-on-one, and often in many cases weren't even killing, but the impact of your tool, your machete, your club, or your panga, as we call them in East Africa, was felt through your body. You could feel the impact of what you were doing, as opposed to perhaps a sniper or, these sort of weapons where you have this detachment. You could shoot people from one continent to another. In this case, it was this incredible intimacy and sort of personal relationship with that thing that you were doing. Mendieta has been a big inspiration, and sort of interestingly has entered in the work, in at least my mind's always has Mendieta in it. And I love this particular piece because it sort of has that combination of the body in the river, and then it's also this meditative piece. This is a work I did called the Cinderella Curse. It was sort of an accumulation of clothing and garb from. I was actually in Memphis when I made this, and I remember going to different sort of stores to buy all these black and blue clothing to sort of create this pile. And in it, I dripped this wine for the duration of the exhibition, and out of it grew this mold. So there was this wonderful aroma. I Sit, You Stand, They Crawl is a work completed recently, and I sort of bring it in because it has a combination of some of the things that I'm talking about, some of this issue of sort of hierarchization, placement of people in the work, but also in the sort of issues that I deal with. This is a massive crown and nest on her head. And in this image is actually two faces, and I've continued this attempt to create these sort of dual or multifaceted characters and personas, and this sort of melding of characters, this carrying of people, this moving along in these sort of mangled bodies is very much a part of the work too. This is called This You Call Civilization. It's a larger work. Misguided hierarchies, unforgivable misguided hierarchies. My Strength Lies, which is sort of a relationship between two parts that's disintegrating, I guess is the best way to say it. Jean-Paul Goude has sort of created these objects of desire and fascination. In fact, I think this piece should be earlier on, but this whole entire series of work that he's done both Grace Jones and rather Grace Jones and many other women, has sort of fascinated me because he does encapsulate a sort of a way of looking at the black female body. Mendieta's rape series, incredibly powerful, somewhat difficult to look at, but at the same time very sensual and brutal in absolute combination. You belong to me, I belong to you is the beginning of this sort of fascination with the idea of plant life and sexuality as a sort of relates to human sexuality and love and belongingness. So I started to use a lot of actual organic sort of material, and I was using grasses and leaves and pearls. This kind of image of fecundity, but also this very funerary, this graveyard is one of her most powerful pieces, I think. Sprout. This idea of death and growing, return, mutilation and return, breaking and returning, and buried and berries. These fertility symbols that I'm inspired by come from really different cultures. There's a Sheila Nagig on the right. That's an Irish motif, and then there's the tiki from the Maori on the top, the jade one. And then there's another sort of Polynesian people, the Delacroix, this other sort of kind of woman, with fully spread legs, and this absolute worship of female creativity at a certain point, I think, in many different cultures has almost been entirely obliterated. So now any image of a woman in this fashion is immediately a dehumanizing image. It's an image that is instantly seen as sort of corrupting the idea of what female beauty and purity is, because now the image that's taken over is that of the Virgin Mary, in actual fact. The Root of All Eves, a sort of continuation of some of these motifs, but sort of mixing them with other things. These pieces are quite dense and very large and almost useless to show in this kind of forum, but I think it's important for you to see them because there's a progression from all the way from the pin-up series and all the objects in between to this kind of incredibly dense and more epic work. You see how much there is in even the smaller sections of the head. And this is the character at the lower end of the piece, the Great Grace and her crown. There's a lot of crowns in the work as well. This is humming. There's two large hummingbirds in there, but I also thought about the buzzing and the noise in the piece. And there's a series of insects and little creatures, and this wonderful little seduction between these two characters, or perhaps hostility between these two characters, this sort of flower being and this woman on the side. Again, flowers and sort of fecundity and fertility and female creativity. I love the fact that flowers are sort of, they're always using other organisms to make love. They need insects and animals and all manner of sort of collaboration to have sex, which I think is beautiful. I regret nothing. Sort of a combination between sort of this love between one being and another, snake-like being on one end and this female body, and they're kind of in this dance of, copulation and eruption in a way. This is out of a show called You and I, Yoni, that I did in London. And Oh Madonna is a very recent piece. It's also out of this series that The Root of All Eves comes out of, and the Me, Myself, and Shy, the three portraits. And in it, I guess I like to show this because it has this sort of the drum oil shoes in it. And I have a massive love of shoes and what they mean, and stilettos and high heels and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, I consider them the official pedestal of the female form, unofficial pedestal of female forms. And but I also think that there's something amazing about how you know, this thing that makes you sort of heightens you is also incredibly destructive and injurious. So this is actually the last image, and I'm going to show you a video. And I'm free if you want to ask questions or come up here and do some spoken word, whatever you want. I'm going to do this last piece. That's it. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, or I think I have a discussion I'm going to have with a few students after this, but yes, there's someone here. You know, I'm not sure how it happened that I ended up being able to do the two things together. But I think ultimately, I think what it is I actually love doing both, and it was a coincidence of pure obsession and practice due to the fact that I couldn't stop. Yeah, I mean, it started off again with the pinups. I mean, you see where the collage is inserted, and it's quite obvious. And then at a certain point, it just got easier to understand how the two things meld together. And ultimately, the liquidness of the watercolor allows so much to be disguised. And yeah, and it mixes two things I like to do. One of it is this like total, faux scientific playing with the chemicals and the wonder of what ink does when you open it up and you mix it with other colors. And then the other side is my love of cutting. I love to cut things and with a scissor, and and so yeah, I think it just happened out of my love of the way that those two things function. Yes, there's a question right there. Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Right, right, right. You know, some of it, you know, it's all purposeful. It's all very conscious. It's all very. These things are in my studio for quite a long time, and they don't stay. They're never stagnant. In fact, I tend to shift things around so much that this work was completely unrecognizable by the time I was done with it. I think I know what you're talking about, but. Is it intentional? Is it purposeful? Absolutely. Is it a pause for the eye? Perhaps that's exactly what I intended. But also, I think about things formally. I mean, I look at things and I know that the cacophony of what's happening in some areas needs to be balanced out by a certain amount of, you know, placid areas or less, you know, less tension, and that's how some of that happens. And some of it is it comes out of pure you know, movement. Like I walk back and forth, you know, obsessively towards and away from this work to see what it is I see when I'm not next to it versus when I'm far away. Because as I said, that's a way of sort of learning something and learning more about something, which is to distance yourself, to go towards it, and to see what emerges in those processes. So it's always intentional, but not in necessarily, you know, in the way that we understand intentional and purposeful in different ways, perhaps. Yes, there's someone there. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm very happy I found it because it's kind of unique. She's always in these beautiful, you know, gowns and always quite regal. And in this case, she was sort of regal and nude. So I don't know how she was photographed in the nude. You know, yeah. I mean, I did kind of answer the question about how I get there. You know, there's certain times when I'm incredibly clear about what I want a particular body of work to be about, and I work towards making that happen. And for the most part, it does come out that way. But I end up with these incredible mistakes. So I've often done a piece, worked on a work for a few months, and then at some point I feel like I'm at this grand point with it, and I throw some, you know, ink on it to make it look a particular way, and then I wake up in the morning and the ink has flown and flowed and gone all over the place, and I'll have to decide whether there's something about that mistake that is inherently important to what I'm trying to say, or if it's you know, if it's destroyed the sort of pure and perfect plan for the piece. So there's a lot of intuitiveness in my process. There's also a lot of learning to let go, which is why I love watercolor. You know, you can always cut something into absolute precision and make decisions about that. But I think with watercolor and fluids, it's the you know, it's kind of the almighty do what it wants kind of thing. And so, but I do have a lot of sketches, a lot of drawings, pencil drawings that come out of all of my research and my obsessive sort of looking at images, and I trace them out, and I use these to create this sort of final work. And then I do these other larger drawings out of the small ones to give myself these bigger formats for the big collages. There's a plan, but you know, I have to let go and surrender at some point, because I think that's when it gets really interesting and exciting. As far as from the way I work, it's always more interesting when the work disobeys me. There's a question up there. It is, but I think. Oh, I mean, I have to confess, I am drawn to kind of dark and morbid things. It's just me. It's Um, so I tend. It's funny that that is what I should say. It just inspires me, but it's sort of what fires me up. It's what gets me feeling that there's something worth doing here, because some of these things are difficult or painful or shouldn't be repeated, or or that, or even where I am is a place that I don't feel I should be in. So it's, I don't know how to answer the question really, because some of what you're asking has to do with things that are in some ways indescribable, because there's all different ways and that one could talk about healing. And I heal and feel healed through the making of this work, but I also feel like there's something about the combining and the resurrecting and the reworking of some of these images that are so um, absolutely they're used so inappropriately that I feel like my reworking them gives them a little bit of a bounce, a little bit more to live for, a little bit to resonate, to help them resonate beyond that little one singular moment of a sort of misrepresented sort of staticness. So that's how I feel, and that's how I think about these images. The therapeuticness in the pinups was very much about the fact that I was letting go of a studio space, that I had incredible resources in graduate school, that I had a community, that I had critiques and teachers and all manner of things. And I had now been diluted to this one kind of singular, lonely thing that had to figure out and solve and direct myself in a sort of post-school, quagmire. And so these little drawings, as simple and kind of, almost childlike in a way, that they're sort of associated with sort of a girl-like fantasy, as much as they seem connected to that kind of thing as they are. They were very much, they were done in this small living room with 3 or 4 jars of ink and a couple of paintbrushes and some water. And in that way, I felt that it was possible to make it without the grandiose structure of school and a massive community and all of that. And I believe in that, because ultimately that's where I come from. I come from a country that is essentially pretty poor, but I think ingenuity and resourcefulness and humor and genius can kind of be created out of things that are considered garbage and throwaway and useless. And we have a massive industry and ethic of that in Kenya and in many poor sort of countries, because there is no other way. So you take things that are garbage and have finished their time, and you bring them back and you make something out of them. Yeah. Yes. This is how I do it. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're asking many things. One, you're asking me, am I a voice for my people, right? And then you're also asking, is if leopard animal pelts and animals are used to represent Africans, then how, perhaps by using them, how am I doing something different? I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but and my answer to you is method, I think, comes out of a deep belief that I'm not a missionary. I'm not here to convert people. I don't believe in that way of teaching and thinking. So I tend to enjoy, and I have a very ironic, sarcastic humor too, but I tend to enjoy this journey that people, in fact, let me not say people, that I go through when I enter the eye of that thing that I most have a problem with. So I use these things that are considered to be sort of hideous and obvious stereotypes against themselves, because I'm sort of embedded in it, and I take on that costume. It's like a little bit like I put on that garb and then I do a different dance. And you know, if you still think that that's what's going on because it's wearing a leopard skin, that's fine, because that's actually ultimately what you want to believe. But I try to slightly shift and tweak the emphasis on a quick read and a quick determination of what something is based on how it looks, which is so ironic because I'm obsessed with what things look like. But yeah, yes, no problem. Is there another? Okay. Mm-hmm. 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 That's actually Tukey. That's the other girl. That is it. It was Grace Jones? Okay, because it's the same. Jean-Paul Gould did that whole champagne glass, and it's like a big spurt of like, yeah, okay. Right. Now, I thought she was coming today. She didn't. No, I haven't met her. No. No, I haven't met her yet. But I'm glad you like her too. Yes. Thank you. Well, I mean, you know, so that's another multi-tiered question. Number one, I'm not a Holocaust survivor, not even a genocide survivor. Like, I was very fortunate that this is not my story. Okay, so and this is not my art right here either. It's just kind of the format of talking about it. But I do try to contextualize what I do so widely, because it really is, these things I obsess on them when I'm making my work, regardless of what my work ends up becoming and looking like. I think it occurred to me that it was a disservice to just show up and just talk about only my work and not perhaps my history or things that have influenced me, the connections that I've made, the sort of my amateur detective work that I've been doing is embedded in the way that I try to discuss this this thing called my art. So with all due respect and with all respect to people who have survived Holocaust and genocide, there is no way I can understand how discuss those things and without having experienced them, or even say that this is, you know, documentation is better than fiction, is better than poeticizing or whatever. That's not the terrain I try to go into. There's this amazing thing that's happening now with the Catholic Church apologizing for all of their priests who've been, you know, abusing and you know, misusing their power with younger boys in the church all over the world. And I was thinking about how it's there's this thing about apologizing and asking for forgiveness that's an attempt to kind of cover it up. So we don't want to discuss it, and we don't want to deal with it, and we're not going to fire anybody, and we're not going to, you know, remove them from the church. And so, and how does that connect to what I'm trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that this is also connects to things like Rwanda, where a lot of the massacres went on, a lot of the killings went on in churches. And these same churches have done similar things. So what I'm trying to say is, I come in with a certain knowledge and a certain kind of emotional, you know, my emotions sort of tend towards focusing on these issues because there's a certain pattern, there's a certain sort of human rhythm in the fact that these things happen. There's a way that we haven't learned to unlearn war and to unlearn genocide. We've stopped, for the most part, cannibalism and virgin killings are almost done, I believe, and I hope. I mean, I'm not joking when I say these things, because there's some things that we, as all cultures did, it was some sort of kind of ritual of understanding how to separate ourselves from things we don't know and what we can do and what we can. But there's something about war which is so primitive and so base, and every single person, if you talk to them at the age of 9 years old, they will tell you it's wrong, and we still use it. So I think that's why I'm obsessed with the fact that it's such a language of negotiation, a language of disgust, that we still use it to say, you know, I like you to be here and you to be there and you to speak this and to believe that and so forth. What happens in the process is that so many people are displaced. There's all these personal stories, and there's people who make sure that these stories are never forgotten and never buried. And I'm not necessarily one of the people who use that exact language in my work, but I tend to think about those things tremendously. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but are there any other questions in the room? Okay, thank you so much for sitting around and